What if I told you that I used a pack of trained security dogs to drive away my neighbor who attempted to seize my land with the HOA's assistance? Yes, that did indeed occur. I'm Jake Collins, and I reside in the country on roughly 50 acres of land. It's serene, calm, and most of all, mine. After years of putting up with the cacophony of the city, nosy neighbors, and the kind of social politics that could make a reality show seem mild, I finally moved out here. I have no one to answer to out here, or so I believed. As you can see, I live close to a posh suburban development with large homes, immaculate lawns, and an HOA that controls it like a totalitarian regime. Thank God I'm not involved, but that hasn't stopped them from attempting to include me in their stupidity more times than I can remember. And the mastermind behind all that bullshit? Whitmore, Clarissa. It seems likely that Clarissa was the prom queen and never moved on. She has a flawless blonde haircut, always wears high heels, and has a smile that never quite reaches her eyes. She is essentially the neighborhood's queen because she is the HOA president. Clarissa despises me as well. Why? Because I'm not going to comply. I don't cut my hedges according to HOA regulations. I don't decorate for the seasons. Above all, I don't care about their community events. This leads me to the day I discovered my land was being invaded as I woke up. The morning was a Saturday. I was enjoying the quiet that comes from living far from society while sipping coffee on my patio and listening to the birds. Then I noticed it. Like they were on a damn parade route. A line of vehicles, SUVs, minivans, and even a few RVs, weighted down my private road. I initially believed that someone might have lost their way. However, no. As the automobiles continued to arrive, my driveway began to resemble a Black Friday Walmart parking lot, with tires crunching on gravel and dust being kicked up. The doors then opened. People began leaving, yawning, stretching, and emptying folding chairs and coolers. Some of them even began erecting tents. A man wearing a Hawaiian shirt was driving a tent peg into the earth, like he was in a national park, and I stared in utter amazement. Then I caught sight of her, Clarissa. She was carrying a clipboard and approaching me with the same arrogant look she always had, as if she were about to grade my life. "Morning, Jake," she smiled broadly. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Before I flung my coffee at her, I put it down. "Clarissa," I uttered gradually. "What the hell is going on?" She laughed briskly. "Oh, don't be dramatic." "Dramatic?" I asked, pointing to the expanding campground. "Why are there 100 people setting up tents on my land?" Her smile widened. "Oh, that?" she asked. "We're hosting the HOA's annual camping retreat." "On my land?" she exclaimed, her eyes wide with phony innocence. "Well, it's such a large space. And since you're technically part of the neighborhood—" "No, I'm not," I interrupted her. She tightened her smile. "You live adjacent to the neighborhood." "Close enough. That's not how property rights work," she said. "We took a vote," as she flipped through her clipboard, as if it were a holy text. "And it was unanimous. Everyone agreed your land would be perfect for the retreat." "Oh, everyone agreed?" I asked in a sarcastic tone. "How generous of them to vote on land they don't own." "It's just for the weekend," Clarissa said kindly. "And honestly, Jake, you should be grateful we're including you." "Thank you." I took a look around. Already, a child was scaling one of my apple trees. On the grass, someone was erecting a portable grill. A hammock was being tied between two of my oak trees by a woman. "This is trespassing," I stated, my tone becoming more stern. "Tell everyone to pack up and leave. Now." Clarissa's smile remained unwavering. "Oh, Jake, let's not make a big deal out of this." "It is a big deal. Jake, please be reasonable," she urged. "We're all neighbors here." "Wrong," I replied. "I'm not your neighbor. I'm the guy who owns the land you're currently invading." Clarissa squinted her eyes. "You don't have to be hostile. You haven't seen hostile yet." That's when it occurred. Across the yard, a teenage girl shrieked loudly. "Oh, there's poop everywhere!" Everyone looked around. The girl's footwear was covered in cow dung, and she was hopping on one foot. "Wait," a female exclaimed. "This isn't a campground?" "No," I replied icily. "It's farmland." Clarissa's grin wavered. "Jake, I think we can clean this up." I took out my phone and dialed. "Nope," she argued. "What are you doing?" "Taking care of the problem." I put my ear to the phone. It's time. Clarissa squinted her eyes. Time for what? Her question was met with a harsh growl. 6 enormous forms, with dark coats, muscular bodies, and keen eyes, appeared from behind the barn. My guards. 6 obedient and well-trained Belgian Malinois. Max, the biggest, gave a deep rolling bark. People stopped. Someone murmured, are those friendly? Depends, I remarked nonchalantly. Max stepped forward and fixed Clarissa with his gaze. Clarissa stumbled. You can't just bring attack dogs out here, I answered. Sure I can, and folded my arms. They live here. The gathering immediately began to disperse when Max barked once more. Folding chairs fell apart. Trunks were crammed with coolers. A whole tent was left unattended. Clarissa retreated toward her SUV, her face pallid. This isn't over, she growled, saying, oh, it's over. Max gave a last bark, and that was that. Officially, the HOA retreat was over. Tire tracks and a few crushed marshmallows were all that remained after Clarissa and her army of intruders drove off. I rubbed behind Max's ears as I turned to him. Good boy. As I watched Clarissa's SUV drive away, Max's tail pounded on the pavement. She wasn't finished, I knew. Clarissa was clueless about how to lose, and if she desired war, and she would get one. I wish I could say that was the last time we spoke. That after packing up and leaving, Clarissa and her small HOA caravan decided to permanently back off after realizing how crazy it was to try to occupy someone else's land. You don't know Clarissa, though. Clarissa does not retreat. She intensifies. And now, she returned with support. I was working on the fence at the back of my property about a week after the entire camping retreat episode when I heard tires crunching down the gravel path. I turned around after wiping the perspiration from my brow. Just in front of the barn, a slick black Mercedes SUV pulled up and came to a stop. When the driver's side door opened, Clarissa emerged. Naturally, she had on heels, on a farm, and next to her, a short, gray-haired man with a leather suitcase in his hand, dressed in a suit. Clarissa grinned as though she had already triumphed. Jake, she said with a smile as she approached me. We need to talk. I folded my arms. No, we don't, she pointed to the man, ignoring me. This is Mr. Preston, she introduced herself. He's our HOA attorney. I squinted. Why is the HOA's lawyer on my property? Mr. Preston grinned in the greasy manner that attorneys always do when they know they're going to defraud you. Mr. Collins, he continued calmly. It appears that there is a miscommunication about property lines. I clenched my jaw. There's no misunderstanding. Clarissa's grin widened. Preston opened his briefcase and remarked, Actually, there is. He produced a pile of documents and gave them to me. These, he said, are the original property surveys for this development. I looked at the documents, and it appears that the land you're currently occupying, specifically the 10-acre section behind your barn, technically falls within the HOA's jurisdiction. I gazed at him. Next, at Clarissa. You've got to be kidding me, Preston stated with ease. We're ready to handle this amicably. Oh, I bet you are. Jake, Clarissa began in a beautiful, sugary voice. We just think it would be better if it were shared. We're not trying to take your land. Shared? I said again, sarcastically. Yes, Clarissa said with a nod. It's such a waste, having all this open space just sitting here. The HOA could use it for community events, barbecues, birthday parties. Wouldn't that be nice? No. Jake? No. Preston cleared his throat. Mr. Collins, this can be settled through a formal property agreement. If you're willing to cooperate, the HOA would even be prepared to offer compensation. How much? Clarissa grinned. We were thinking $2,000. In fact, I burst out laughing. I asked, $2,000? For 10 acres of land? You're not really using it, Clarissa remarked, her smile growing brittle. As I tossed the papers back at Preston, I asked, You know what? Get off my property. Preston's smile remained fixed. Mr. Collins, if you refuse to cooperate, the HOA is prepared to pursue legal action. While giggling, I asked, You're going to sue me? Good luck with that. Clarissa's gaze sparkled. We'll see you in court, Jake. I slightly leaned in to catch a glimpse of her smile. Bring it. Clarissa's lips clenched. Preston followed as she pivoted on her heel and strode back toward the SUV. She yelled over her shoulder, This isn't over! It is for you! I yelled in response. The SUV left the driveway and vanished down the street. As I stood there, with my hands on my hips. I had trembling hands. The lawsuit did not concern me. However, I was acquainted with Clarissa. She would not give up until she achieved her goal, and I suspected that this was only the start. 2 weeks later, the lawsuit was filed. A smug-looking messenger brought it in a manila envelope. I quickly read the first few pages after opening it at the kitchen table. HOA property rights are being violated. Non-compliance with neighborhood rules. Unlawful use of communally owned land. My coffee almost choked me. I took up the phone and dialed Susan Myers, my attorney. After I gave her the rundown, Susan responded, "Jake, they don't have a case." "Then why are they trying this?" "Because Clarissa is banking on you not wanting to fight it." I said, "She's going to lose." "Yes," she replied, "but that's not the point. She's trying to bury you in legal fees until you give up." When I said, "That's cute, she thinks I'm going to back down." "Jake," I interrupted, "Susan, what happens if I win?" "Then, the HOA has to cover all legal fees and drop the claim." "Perfect." "Jake." Then I said, "File the counterclaim. Let's make this expensive for her." Susan's voice became piercing. "I like the way you think." Clarissa chose to further ruin my life while the legal drama was going on. She sent a compliance officer to go over my property first. A man in a shabby suit arrived with a clipboard while I was outdoors working on the fence. He squinted at me and said, "Pardon me, sir. I'm here to determine whether your property complies with HOA standards." I declared, "I'm not in the HOA." "Well, that's not entirely clear. It is to me. You have a number of violations," he continued, as he looked over his document. "Unapproved fencing, unkempt landscaping, improper disposal of animal waste." I asked, "Animal waste? It's a farm." "Still a violation. Get off my property." "Sir, you'll need to resolve these issues within 30 days, or what?" When Max walked up behind me, his tongue lolling out, he opened his jaws, then stopped. Is that a guard dog?" "No," I replied with a flimsy smile. "He's family." Max gave a deep roar. The man answered, "Okay," and stepped back. "I'll, follow up later. You do that." I saw him dash back to his vehicle and leave. Clarissa exerted pressure. Hard. I wasn't bending, though. She believed she could beat me. She believed that the strain would cause me to fold. She didn't know who she was up against. Susan gave me a call 2 days later. "You're going to love this, Jake," she added. "Hit me. I found the original land deed, and it explicitly states that the HOA's jurisdiction ends at the property line. Your property is legally excluded from HOA control. So they have nothing. They have less than nothing." I grinned. Perfect. Clarissa had erred greatly. And now, the time has come for me to hold her accountable. The first thing Clarissa did wrong was to think I would quit up. Her second error? I didn't realize I was having so much fun. You see, everything changed after Susan verified that the HOA had no legal justification. It was no longer about protecting my territory. The screws needed to be turned. And believe me, when I say that nothing is more fulfilling than seeing someone who believes they are untouchable acknowledge their mistake. The lawsuit was the first step. Clarissa most likely suffered whiplash because Susan filed a counterclaim so quickly. Susan informed me over the phone that we're suing for damages, legal fees, trespassing violations, emotional distress. Emotional distress? I said again, laughing. Susan remarked gravely, "Jake, you had strangers camping on your property. The law takes that kind of thing very seriously. And you think we'll win?" "Oh, we'll win," Susan said. "The question is how much we'll take from them." Immediately, Clarissa's attorney attempted to backtrack. When Susan called Preston, he stated, "It appears that there was a miscommunication." "No misunderstanding," retorted Susan. "Your client trespassed on private property and attempted to claim ownership. This is open and shut." Preston remarked, "I'm sure we can settle this privately," in a cool, collected voice. "We're past that," Susan said. "We'll see you in court. Go for it." Clarissa made the decision to take things personally while the legal drama played out. Because she did, of course. She began by launching a slander campaign. The hardware store cashier gave me a strange look when I went into town one day to get some supplies. I said, everything okay? He said, heard about the situation as he packed my belongings with care. What situation? His voice lowered. Clarissa's been talking, he continued. Said you're suing the HOA out of spite. That you're trying to take money from the community. I chuckled. Is that so? Said you threatened her, the cashier continued. Sicked your dogs on her. Did I? I asked with a little smile. I don't believe it, the cashier remarked. But some people are talking. Let them talk. Because here's the thing, I cared about public opinion, according to Clarissa. It didn't. She then attempted intimidation. One afternoon, I heard a car come up as I was working in the yard. A sedan in silver. 2 men left, middle-aged, with haircuts that are a bit too sharp and suits that are a bit too tight. HOA thugs, Mr. Collins? Asked one of them. Depends who's asking. He produced a card. Paul Travers, HOA security. I raised my eyebrow. Security? What exactly are you securing? Travers said. There have been some. Complaints with ease. Complaints, I said once more. From who? A concerned member of the HOA. Dryly, let me guess, I said. Rhymes with Clarissa? Travers's smile remained fixed. There have been reports of aggressive behavior on your property. You mean the dogs? Among other things. What other things? Intimidation, verbal threats, I chuckled. And you have proof of that? We don't need proof, Travers stated with ease. Just a reasonable cause for concern. Max, who had been sitting next to me the entire time, growled softly. I'd say you have reasonable cause to leave, I replied. Travers's grin wavered. Jake, he continued in the same phony, amiable voice Clarissa usually had. There are 2 possible outcomes. Either you cooperate with us, or you complicate things. Go ahead, I said. Make it difficult. Max took a step forward. Travers glanced in his direction. We'll be in touch, Travers stated firmly. You do that. They departed, and I grinned to myself as I stood there. Clarissa was at a loss for what to do. She was aware of it. It was a letter that dealt the death blow. After a month or so, Susan gave me a call. Jake, she replied, you're not going to believe this. Try me. The HOA wants to settle. I smiled. Define settle. They've offered to drop the lawsuit and pay your legal fees. When I said, that's cute. What's the catch? No catch, mentioned Susan. They just want this to go away. And what happens if I say no? Then we go to court and take them for everything they've got. What's the smart play? Susan paused. If it were me, I'd bleed them dry. And if it were me, take the deal and use it to humiliate them. I grinned. I like the way you think. To make the announcement, the HOA scheduled a public meeting. Since they obviously did, the community center served as the venue. There were all the typical suspects, soccer mothers, elderly couples, and the man who constantly wore golf shirts, despite obviously not playing the game. Pale but calm, Clarissa stood in the front of the room. Her voice was strained as she stated, We've come to a resolution regarding the recent property dispute. After much consideration, the HOA has decided to drop the claim. There were murmurs among the crowd. Clarissa's smile was barely there as she said, In addition, the HOA will be paying for all legal fees associated with the case. The whispers grew louder. I was sitting in the back with my arms folded and a stupid smile on my face. Clarissa glanced in my direction. She gritted her teeth and added, The HOA would like to formally apologize to Mr. Collins for any misunderstanding. I held up my hand. I yelled, Does this mean the HOA acknowledges they were wrong? Clarissa's expression tensed. Yes. I grinned and replied, Say it louder for the people in the back. She wiggled her jaw. The HOA acknowledges they were wrong. That's what I thought. I felt as though Clarissa's eyes were blazing at me. I got up, stretched, and smiled languidly at the audience. Well, I replied, since we're all friends now, maybe next time you'll ask before you try to steal my land. Clarissa had a slender smile. With Max at my side, I turned and left the room. Susan was waiting by her car when I went outside. She grinned and replied, You're an asshole. I have learned from the best, I answered. Drinks? Absolutely. After getting into the car, we took off. I was aware that Clarissa would be troubled by this for months, perhaps years. She could do nothing, though. She had been defeated by me. Totally. What's the best thing? You know, I didn't even need to make a lot of effort. That should be the end of it, wouldn't it? Clarissa was defeated. The HOA acknowledged their loss. I made her look bad in front of the entire community. She ought to have licked her wounds and crawled back inside her McMansion. However, no. Clarissa was clueless about how to lose. People like her attempt to destroy everything as they go when they are unable to prevail. It began modestly. The fence's destruction caught my attention right away. One morning, Max and I were strolling around the property when I noticed that 3 of the wooden posts along the south side were completely shattered. Nor from the weather. It appeared to be deliberate. I squatted down and rubbed my palm over the sharp edges. Max grumbled and sniffed the ground. "Easy, boy," I whispered. It might have been a haphazard vandalism incident. A group of foolish youths seeking mischief. However, I was aware. I discovered tire tracks slicing through the back field 2 days later. There were large ruts in the dirt where someone had driven right across the land. The tracks ended nicely at the edge of Clarissa's neighborhood, and I followed them all the way to the property line. Yes, delicate. Then the letters began, notices that seem official, printed with the HOA's emblem, and come in elegant white envelopes. You are in violation of county noise regulations. Failure to comply with environmental standards may result in fines. Your fencing does not meet community aesthetic standards. Each and every one of them was utter nonsense. I gave Susan a call. "They're trying to bury you in bureaucracy," she replied. "The fines won't stick, but they're hoping you'll get tired of fighting." I remarked, "They obviously don't know me. Do you want me to file another counterclaim?" "No," I replied. "I have a better idea. Did Clarissa want to act shady? All right, I might also get filthy." I asked for a favor the following day. You see, you come to know people when you spend enough time in the country. Individuals with abilities. Dave was the name of my guy. He spent 30 years working for the county and held a surveyor's license. Knew more than anyone else about the limits of land. That afternoon, Dave arrived with his gear. He set up the tripod and said, "What are we looking for?" "I need to know exactly where my property line ends," I replied. Dave looked at me knowingly. "HOA trouble?" "Yep. Say no more." Dave worked quickly, walked the whole length of the property line, took measurements, and exchanged notes. After finishing, he gave me a pile of documents. "You're clean," he announced. "Not only that, but," he grinned on his lips, "turns out your property line extends 5 feet further than Clarissa's fence." My brows went up. "Meaning?" "Meaning," Dave replied, "Clarissa's property line encroaches on your land." I grinned. "Oh, this is going to be fun." I went to the edge of the property that evening, where Clarissa's yard and mine were divided by an ostentatious wrought iron fence. Max padded next to me, listening intently. I took out an orange spray paint can and used it to draw a bright line across the ground at the precise location of the new property line. I then went to Clarissa's gate and knocked. The front door opened a few seconds later, and Clarissa emerged with a glass of red wine in her hand and a silk bathrobe. "Jake," she uttered sharply. "It's late." "Just thought you should know," I replied. "Your fence is on my land." She squinted. "Excuse me?" "Got a surveyor to confirm it," I said. "Turns out you're 5 feet over the line." She narrowed her lips. "That's not possible." "Oh, it's possible," I grinned. "And I expect you to fix it." Clarissa's gaze flickered. "Jake, you're being ridiculous." "No," I replied. "I'm being generous. Because technically, I could have you fined for illegal encroachment. Or, she uttered firmly, or you could give me that section of land in exchange for me not reporting you." Her jaw dropped, closed after that. "It's 5 feet, Clarissa," the first mentioned. "What's it worth to you?" She squinted her eyes. "You're blackmailing me." "Nope," I answered with a smile. "I'm negotiating." Clarissa's fingernails drummed on her wine glass. "Fine," she responded, following a protracted silence. "I'll have the paperwork drawn up tomorrow." With a hat tip, I said, "It's a pleasure doing business with you." Max gave one bark. Clarissa swung around and shut the door. I grinned. Susan gave me a call early the following morning. "Jake," she said, "the HOA's attorney just sent me an email. Yeah? Clarissa is officially withdrawing all complaints. The fines, the citations, everything." "Nice." "She also sent a revised property deed," Susan stated. "You now officially own 5 more feet of land along the east side." "Perfect." Susan questioned, "You really think this is over?" "No," I replied, "but I don't mind letting her think it is." There was silence for a time. The HOA withdrew. Not another letter. No more examinations. "There will be no more concerned neighbors," Clarissa even appeared to back off, right up to the celebration. After a month or so, I began to notice activity at Clarissa's house. There are trucks arriving, setting up tables. Cases of champagne are brought in by caterers. Clarissa has a party planned, and it was a fundraiser, not just any party. For the HOA, Clarissa herself approached the fence with a glass of wine as I was out in the yard working. "Jake," she stated in a kind way. "Clarissa, we're having a little gathering this Saturday," she continued. "It's a private event." "Cool. I'd appreciate it if you could. Keep the noise down." "Noise?" I asked with a little smile. "You mean like barking dogs?" Her smile faded. "I'm sure you wouldn't want to disrupt the evening," she said. "It's for a good cause." My response was, "Oh, I wouldn't dream of it. The problem is that there was a preset on my security system. Intruder alert. Precisely at 8:00 p.m. I turned it on that Saturday. Clarissa's backyard was filled with dazzling white light from 6 security lights. An announcement that had been pre-recorded was blasted via the speakers. "Warning. You are trespassing on private property." The dogs suddenly began to bark. Max and the others barked loudly enough to tremble the ground as they ran directly to the barrier. People let out a shout. Glasses broke. A man fell into the pool after tripping. Clarissa's face took on the hue of raw chicken. I smiled as I stood with my arms crossed at the edge of the land. Clarissa bounded to the boundary. "What are you doing?" My naive response was, "Oh, I thought I heard a trespasser." "Turn it off," I replied. "Sure thing," I switched it off. Clarissa was trembling with anger as she stood there. "This isn't over," she growled. "Actually?" I grinned back. "I think it is." "And now?" Indeed, it was.